Daniel Carter pressed his hand against the cold metal wall of his cell and counted the days in his mind for what felt like the thousandth time since the Vrin captured his cargo ship 6 months ago, dragging him to this prison on Kethera Prime, where the air smelled like rust and despair, hung heavier than of artificial gravity. The prison housed hundreds of beings from across the galaxy, all taken by the Vrin Collective for one purpose: cheap labor in the mineral mines that stretched deep beneath the planet's surface, where guards with shock weapons made sure every prisoner understood that resistance meant pain and death. Daniel had learned to keep his head down and his eyes open during those long months, watching guard patterns and memorizing shift changes, while his hands worked the mining equipment alongside aliens of every shape and size imaginable, some with 4 arms and others with none at all. It was during the 3rd week that he first noticed the small alien girl struggling with a drill twice her size, her thin arms trembling as she tried to meet the daily quota that the Vrin demanded from every prisoner, regardless of their physical capabilities or limitations. She belonged to a species called the Sither. Her father, Torin, had explained during one of the brief rest periods when guards allowed prisoners to drink the recycled water that tasted like metal and chemicals combined into something barely tolerable. The Sither were peaceful beings with silver blue skin that seemed to shimmer under the harsh prison lights, their large eyes filled with a sadness that Daniel recognized, because he saw the same expression every time he caught his reflection in them. Polished metal surface. Torin was dying, and everyone could see it happening slowly each day as his body gave out under the strain of labor his species was never meant to endure. Built for contemplation and study rather than breaking rocks in underground tunnels, Lyra was his daughter, and she was barely 12 years old by human standards, forced to watch her father fade away while the Vrin guards laughed and placed bets on how long the old Sither would last before collapsing permanently. Daniel started helping them whenever he could manage it without drawing too much attention from the guards, finishing Lyra's quota when she fell behind and sharing his food rations with Torin even though it left his own stomach growling through the night. The girl reminded him of his niece back on Earth, the same determination in her eyes even when everything seemed hopeless and lost beyond any chance of recovery. For months, Daniel had been planning his escape, with the careful patience that came from knowing he would only get one chance to break free from this nightmare, studying the shuttle bay during mandatory walks and identifying the one escape pod that still had functional navigation systems. He had loosened bolts in his cell door and memorized the guard rotation down to the minute, waiting for the perfect opportunity that would give him the best chance of survival. That opportunity came on a night when meteor showers struck the planet's upper atmosphere with unusual intensity, causing power fluctuations throughout the facility that sent guards scrambling to prevent a complete systems failure. Alarms blared across every corridor, while emergency lights flickered on and off in patterns that created moments of complete darkness. Exactly what Daniel needed to slip from his cell and make his way toward the shuttle bay. His heart pounded as he moved through the shadows and avoided the main corridors where guards rushed past with weapons ready, their attention focused on containing the growing chaos rather than watching for escaping prisoners. The shuttle bay doors stood partially open due to the power failure, and Daniel could see the escape pod waiting like a promise of freedom, just 50 meters away from where he crouched. Behind a stack of cargo containers, he was going to make it, and the realization filled him with such powerful hope that his hands shook as he prepared to sprint across the open space. Then he heard the crying, and everything inside him went cold with recognition, because he knew that sound, had heard it too many times in the mines when Lyra watched her father struggle through another impossible day. Shat huddled in a corner near the maintenance corridor with her thin arms wrapped around her, knees and tears streaming down her silver blue face. Alone and terrified in the darkness, Daniel moved toward her, without thinking about the risk, and knelt down beside the small alien girl who looked up at him with those large eyes full of grief. Durin had died that afternoon during the meteor shower chaos, and the guards had come for Lyra immediately, planning to send her to a different facility, where young prisoners were trained for more specialized labor. She had escaped from their custody during the confusion, but now she was lost and alone with guards searching everywhere for the missing Scyther child. Daniel glanced back at the escape pod and calculated his options with cold mathematical precision. If he took Lyra with him, the extra weight would slow them down, and the guards would catch them both before they cleared the facility perimeter. If he went alone, he would make it to freedom within minutes and leave this hell behind forever. The girl looked at him with absolute trust, despite everything she had suffered, and Daniel felt something break open in his chest, because he knew what he had to do, even though every survival instinct screamed against to picked up Lyra and carried her quickly to a large cargo container near the loading dock, opening it carefully and placing her inside among the supply boxes. "Stay quiet no matter what you hear," he whispered while programming the container's delivery system to load automatically onto the next outbound transport, which, according to the schedule he had memorized, would launch within the hour. Lyra grabbed his hand and tried to pull him into the container with her, but Daniel shook his head and smiled even though his heart was breaking. "You're going home," he told her firmly before sealing the container and activating the automated loading sequence. Then he ran toward the opposite end of the shuttle bay and triggered every alarm he could reach while shouting at the top of his lungs to draw the guards away from the cargo area. They came running with weapons raised, and Daniel put his hands up in surrender as spotlights blazed across his face. Commander Vex arrived minutes later with a smile that showed too many sharp teeth as he ordered his guards to beat Daniel unconscious for the escape attempt. When Daniel woke up, he was in maximum security with new scars across his back and a life sentence that meant he would never see Earth or freedom again. But through the pain and despair, he held on to one thought that made it all worthwhile. Somewhere out there among the stars, a small alien girl was flying towards safety because one human had chosen her life over his own freedom. 3 years passed in the maximum security wing where Daniel existed rather than lived, counting days that blurred together into an endless gray monotony. Then one morning the alarms began blaring again, but this time they sounded different, carrying a note of panic that Daniel had never heard before in all his time as a prisoner. Something was happening outside, and Daniel pressed against the energy barrier of his cell to see guards running past with expressions of confusion and fear on their faces. The impossible was occurring, and Daniel didn't know it yet. But the small girl he had saved was coming back for him with secrets that would change everything he thought he knew about humanity's place among the stars. The Scyther homeworld of preservation emerged from hyperspace like a jewel hanging in the darkness, its surface covered in structures that blended so perfectly with the natural landscape that Daniel almost missed them at first glance. Lyra stood beside him on the observation deck and pointed out features that became clearer as the radiant dawn approached the planet. "Those mountains are actually libraries," she explained while indicating ranges that stretched across entire continents. The Scyther build down rather than up, preserving the surface beauty while creating vast underground archives. The ship entered atmosphere smoothly, and Daniel watched cities appear below them, designed with such careful attention to natural harmony that they seemed to grow from the landscape rather than being imposed upon it. They landed at the capital city's primary spaceport, where officials waited to greet them with formal courtesy. That felt genuine, rather than merely ceremonial. Captain Ryan Mitchell accompanied Daniel and Lyra through security checkpoints that scanned them with technology far more advanced than anything Daniel had encountered during his years as a cargo pilot. The High Council chamber is located 3 kilometers underground, Mitchell explained as they entered an elevator that descended smoothly through layers of rock and metal. They meet in a space surrounded by the oldest records in Scyther history. The elevator doors opened onto a corridor lined with crystalline displays showing images from countless civilizations throughout galactic history, species that had risen and fallen while the Scyther watched and recorded everything. Daniel felt like he was walking through a museum dedicated to the entire galaxy's past. The council chamber itself was circular and massive, with seating arranged in concentric rings that descended toward a central platform, where witnesses and speakers addressed the assembled members. Elder Nira sat at the highest point, her age evident in the way she moved with careful deliberation despite the advanced medical technology that kept Scyther leaders alive for centuries. Counselor Ven occupied a seat directly across from her, younger by Scyther standards, but still ancient compared to any human Daniel had ever met. What surprised Daniel most was seeing another human already present in the chamber. A woman in her 40s, wearing the insignia of Earth's scientific community, Dr. Lisa Morgan. She introduced herself while shaking Daniel's hand with obvious relief at seeing another human. I was studying at a research station 2 systems away when the Scyther invited me here. Elder Nira's voice echoed through the chamber with surprising strength for someone so ancient. We apologize for the unusual circumstances, she said while addressing both humans. But Lyra's illegal access of classified information has forced us to address the question of human contact directly rather than waiting for our scheduled timeline. Dr. Morgan looked at Daniel with confusion, and he realized she knew nothing about his story. Lyra stepped forward and bowed formally to the council before speaking. I take full responsibility for breaching security protocols, she said clearly, but I believed then and believe now that understanding the human who saved my life was worth the consequences. Elder Nira's expression softened slightly as she regarded the young Scyther. Your testimony convinced enough council members to attempt limited contact, she acknowledged. Now we must decide how to proceed. Counselor Ven stood and gestured toward the holographic displays that filled the chamber's center. Dr. Morgan, you are here because we need human perspective on the information we are about to share, he said while pulling up Earth's file from the database. Mr. Carter is here because his individual actions have influenced our decision-making process. The display showed everything that Lyra had revealed to Daniel on the ship, but seeing it presented to the full council made it feel more real and more frightening. Dr. Morgan's face went pale as she read the classification and understood its implications. Category 1, Apex Civilization. She whispered while her hands trembled slightly. You think humanity will reshape the entire galactic order? Elder Nira nodded slowly and pulled up the predictive models that showed humanity's 2 possible paths. Our models have proven accurate for over 100,000 years, she explained. We have predicted the rise and fall of civilizations with remarkable precision. She focused the display on the branching point that represented humanity's critical choice. We believe humanity will face this decision within the next 50 years as Earth expands its presence in the galaxy. Elder Nira continued, the choice between protection and conquest will determine not only humanity's fate but potentially the fate of thousands of other species. Counselor Ven stepped forward with clear concern in his expression. This is why some of us argue that we should act now to contain humanity before you gain the power to choose conquest, he said bluntly. The risk is too great to ignore. Dr. Morgan bristled at the suggestion, but Elder Nira raised a hand for patience. Others believe that humanity's capacity for compassion and sacrifice proves you will choose the path of protection. The elder continued while looking directly at Daniel. Mr. Carter's actions on Kethra Prime have become central to this debate. Daniel felt every eye in the chamber focus on him and realized that somehow his decision to save one alien child had become evidence in a trial concerning his entire species' future. I would like to share what we have learned about humans during our observation, Elder Nira said while pulling up research data. Perhaps it will help you understand why we are both hopeful and concerned. The display showed human history from the Scyther perspective, highlighting patterns that Daniel had never considered. Before, humans create intensely loyal bonds within their groups, but historically struggled to extend those bonds to outsiders. She explained, this creates both beautiful cooperation and terrible conflict. Images showed human achievements in art, science, and exploration, alongside images of wars and atrocities. Humans possess remarkable creativity and problem-solving abilities, but also show concerning patterns of resource exploitation and territorial expansion. Elder Nira continued, you adapt to new environments faster than any species we have observed, but sometimes destroy those environments in the process. Dion Morgan spoke up carefully. You are describing the full complexity of human nature, she said. We are capable of both great good and terrible evil. Elder Nira nodded in agreement. Precisely, she responded. And this is what makes the prediction so uncertain despite our models. Usual accuracy. Counselor Venn pulled up statistical analyses that showed probability distributions. Individual humans like Mr. Carter demonstrate clear capacity for selfless behavior. He acknowledged while highlighting Daniel's actions. But human governments and large groups often behave very differently than individuals. He showed examples from human history where collective actions contradicted individual morality. This is why we cannot simply trust that humanity will choose wisely. Venn argued, the gap between individual conscience and group behavior is too large. Elder Nira turned to face Daniel directly with an expression of deep seriousness. Mr. Carter, we understand that you cannot speak for all of humanity, she said carefully. But we would like to hear your perspective on this question. The chamber fell silent as everyone waited for Daniel to respond. He looked at Dr. Morgan, who gave him an encouraging nod. Then at Lyra, who watched with hope clear in her eyes. I cannot tell you what humanity will choose. Daniel began slowly. Because humans are individuals first, and we often disagree about the right path forward. He paused to gather his thoughts before continuing. What I can tell you is that most humans I have known want to do good when given the choice. He said honestly, we make mistakes, and sometimes we choose poorly, but we also learn from those mistakes if given the chance. Counselor Venn started to object, but Elder Nira silenced him with a gesture. I saved Lyra because it felt right even though it cost me everything. Daniel continued, but I know other humans who might have made different choices in that moment. He met Elder Nira's ancient eyes with complete honesty. If you want humanity to choose the path of protection, then maybe you should give us the information we need to make that choice wisely. Daniel suggested, show us your historical records and teach us what you have learned from 100,000 years of observation. Dr. Morgan stepped forward to stand beside Daniel. He's right, she said firmly. If you want to guide humanity toward becoming protectors rather than conquerors, then partnership is better than containment. Elder Nira smiled for the first time since the session began. This is exactly what we hope to hear, she said while looking at the other council members. And it is why I believe we should proceed with the contact proposal. She pulled up a plan that outlined limited information sharing between Scyther and human governments. We will share our historical database with a select group of human leaders and scientists. Elder Nira announced. Dr. Morgan will serve as our primary liaison, and Mr. Carter will act as cultural ambassador. Counselor Venn looked unhappy, but did not object. We are taking a calculated risk, Elder Nira acknowledged, but Mr. Carter's sacrifice and Dr. Morgan's wisdom suggest that humanity deserves this chance. Daniel felt the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders like a physical burden. The Scyther diplomatic vessel Radiant Dawn hung in space above Cathra Prime like a gleaming promise of justice. Surrounded by a dozen smaller ships that formed a perfect defensive pattern. Around the prison facility, Commander Vex stood in the control center, with his claws gripping the console hard enough to leave marks in the metal, staring at the display screens that showed ships from a species he had always considered weak and completely irrelevant to galactic affairs. "They are demanding we release a specific prisoner," his second officer reported with confusion clear in every word. Checking the message again, as if expecting it to change upon review, Vex laughed harshly and shook his head at the absurdity of the situation unfolding before him. The Scyther have never shown military capability in recorded history, he said while pulling up the species profile on his personal screen and scanning through the data. "They observe and record, but they do not fight or make demands backed by force." Yet here, they were with weapon systems active and shields raised in clear preparation for combat if their demands were not met. Immediately, Ambassador Kellen's face appeared on the main view screen with an expression of calm determination that seemed almost unnatural for a Scyther, whose species was known throughout the galaxy for avoiding confrontation at any cost. "Commander Vex, we are here to retrieve prisoner Daniel Carter from your facility," the ambassador stated clearly, while behind him a younger Scyther in security uniform stood with perfect military posture. "You will release him to our custody within the hour, or face consequences that your government will find most unpleasant." Vex felt his confidence waver slightly, because this was not how the Scyther behaved. "According to everything in the database, I don't know who told you we have this human," he replied while making a subtle gesture to his security team to prepare weapons. "But you are mistaken in your information, and I suggest you leave this system before you create an incident that escalates beyond your ability to control." The young Scyther in the security uniform stepped forward, and Vex noticed something familiar about her despite the years that had passed, and the professional bearing she now carried. "Daniel Carter is being held in Maximum Security Cell Block 7, Section 12. Cell number 43, she said with absolute certainty while meeting Vex's eyes through the view screen. "I know because I spent 3 years making sure I could find him when the time came for his rescue." Recognition hit Vex like a physical blow as he realized this was the small girl who had escaped 3 years ago, the one whose disappearance had cost him a significant bonus and several promotions. "Lyra." He said her name slowly while his mind raced through possible responses to this unexpected situation. She nodded once and continued speaking with a voice that carried the weight of someone who had spent years preparing for this exact moment. "You thought I was just another weak Scyther child when you sent guards to take me away from my dying father," she told him while her hands remained steady at her sides. "You never imagined that the human who sacrificed his freedom to save me would inspire my entire species to take action against your criminal enterprise." Ambassador Kellen pulled up holographic displays that showed documented evidence of Rin illegal operations spanning decades, proof of war crimes and violations of galactic treaties that would destroy their government's standing among civilized systems. "We have spent 3 years building this case with the Galactic Council," the ambassador explained calmly, while the evidence scrolled across multiple screens. "We have testimony from freed prisoners, financial records of your slave trade, and communication logs that prove systematic abuse of countless beings." Captain Ryan Mitchell appeared beside the ambassador with the bearing of someone who had commanded ships through actual combat rather than just ceremonial duties. "The Scyther may prefer observation to violence," he said while gesturing to the ships surrounding the prison. But we will not stand by while injustice continues, especially when it involves someone who showed us what true courage looks like. Vex felt control slipping away from him as more ships appeared on his sensors, these bearing the marks of the Galactic Council peacekeeping forces. If you refuse to release Daniel Carter, we will share all evidence with every government in known space, Ambassador Kellen continued. The Vrin Collective will collapse under sanctions, and your personal assets will be frozen across all systems. The choice was clear, even to someone as stubborn as Vex, who had built his career on intimidation and cruelty rather than wisdom or foresight. He gave the order through gritted teeth and watched as guards dragged Daniel Carter from maximum security toward the shuttle. Baby Human looked terrible after 3 years in isolation, malnourished and covered in scars that spoke of regular beings, his eyes squinting against lights that seemed too bright after so long in darkness. Lyra met Daniel at the airlock between the prison and the Scyther ship, stepping forward as he stumbled slightly on legs that had forgotten how to walk properly. He looked at her with confusion at first, and then recognition dawned slowly across his face as he realized who stood before him. Lyra? His voice came out rough from disuse and shock. She smiled, and it transformed her entire face into an expression of pure joy mixed with relief. You saved my life when you had every reason to save yourself. Instead, she said while helping him walk toward the medical bay where Scyther doctors waited. I promised myself that I would find you and return what you gave me. Daniel tried to speak, but emotions overwhelmed his ability to form words coherent enough to express everything he felt behind them. Galactic Council peacekeepers moved into the prison facility and began arresting Commander Vex along with his senior staff, reading charges that would keep them imprisoned for the rest of their natural lives. The Radiant Dawn detached from the facility and began moving away from Kethera Prime while Lyra stayed beside Daniel in the medical bay, watching as doctors worked to repair 3 years of damage. I have so much to tell you, she said quietly after the doctors had finished their initial treatment and left them alone. About what I learned after you saved me. About what my people discovered when they investigated humans. Daniel looked at her with exhaustion clear on his face, but also curiosity that even years of suffering could not completely extinguish. Your people have been watching humanity? He asked while trying to sit up straighter despite his body's protests. Lyra nodded slowly and took a deep breath before continuing. The Scyther are not what other species think we are. She began carefully. We appear weak and peaceful because we choose to, but we are actually one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy. She pulled up a holographic display that showed timelines stretching back over 100,000 years. We have been observing and recording galactic history since before most current species achieved space flight, she explained while the data scrolled past. We maintain the largest database of information about every known civilization. Daniel stared at the display with growing amazement as he began to understand the implications. And you have information about humans? He managed to ask. Lyra's expression shifted to something more serious and uncertain. We have a complete file on humanity that is classified at the highest level of Scyther government, she admitted while her fingers moved nervously. Only the High Council is supposed to have access to it. Daniel waited for her to continue and sensed that something important was coming. I broke into the database after you saved me because I needed to understand what kind of being would sacrifice everything for a stranger, Lyra said quietly. What I found changed how my entire species views humanity and our future relationship with Earth. She leaned forward and her voice dropped to almost a whisper. Humans are predicted to become one of only 4 Category 1 apex civilizations in galactic history, she revealed. Species that reshape the entire balance of power and change how the galaxy functions. Daniel felt his mind struggling to process this information after 3 years of believing he would die alone in the cell. But there's more. Lyra continued with clear hesitation. There's a warning in the file about humanity's future, something that has divided the Scyther High Council about whether to make contact with Earth or remain hidden. She looked at him with those large eyes full of hope and fear combined. I returned to save you because you proved that humans can choose compassion over survival, she said firmly. But I also returned because my people need to decide humanity's role in the galaxy, and your choice might help determine that future. Daniel spent 5 days recovering in the medical bay of the Radiant Dawn while Scyther doctors worked carefully to repair the damage that 3 years of torture and malnutrition had inflicted on his body. Lyra visited him every day during those recovery sessions, sitting beside his bed and talking about everything except the secrets she had mentioned. During their first conversation, she told him about her training as a security officer and how the Scyther military operated differently from other species because they focused on precision and knowledge rather than raw firepower. She described her homeworld, preservation, with its massive libraries that stretched underground for kilometers, containing physical records of galactic history that predated most civilizations' understanding of their own past. Daniel listened and asked questions while his strength slowly returned, grateful for the company, but aware that something important remained unspoken between them. On the 6th day, the doctors declared him healthy enough to leave the medical bay, and Lyra invited him to the observation deck where floor-to-ceiling windows showed the stars streaming past as the ship traveled through hyperspace. They stood in silence for several minutes before Lyra finally spoke about what had been weighing on her mind. I need to tell you the rest, she said while her reflection in the window showed nervousness clearly about what the Scyther database says regarding humanity. Daniel turned to face her fully and gave her his complete attention. After I escaped in that cargo container, a Scyther patrol found me drifting near our home system. She began explaining the journey that had brought her back to him. They were horrified when they heard my story about the prison and about you. She pulled up a holographic interface and accessed files that made Daniel's eyes widen because he could see classification markers that indicated restricted information. My people immediately began investigating both the Vrin operation and human civilization. Lyra continued while images of Earth appeared in the display. What they found in our historical database surprised even the High Council members who had lived for centuries. The display shifted to show a timeline that stretched back impossibly far into the past. The Scyther are over 100,000 years old as a spacefaring species, she revealed. While the numbers scrolled past, we achieved faster than light travel when most current galactic powers were still developing basic tools. Daniel felt his mind struggling with the implications of this information. But no one knows this about your species, he said carefully. Everyone thinks the Scyther are weak observers who avoid conflict. Lyra smiled sadly and nodded her agreement. We choose to appear that way deliberately, she explained while pulling up profiles of various galactic civilizations. Throughout our history, we learned that power attracts conflict and conquest attracts resistance. She showed him records of ancient wars that had destroyed entire species before the current galactic order emerged. We decided long ago to become record keepers and observers rather than rulers. Lyra said quietly, we document everything but interfere with almost nothing, allowing other species to develop naturally while we preserve their histories. The display changed to show Earth from space, along with data streams that represented decades of observation. We have been watching humanity since your people developed radio signals, she admitted, recording your progress and feeding information into our predictive models. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine at the idea of being observed for so long without knowing Every sapient species in the galaxy has a file in our database. Lyra continued. Most contain basic information about biology, culture, and technological development. She hesitated before pulling up a new screen that showed classification warnings and symbols. Daniel could not read. The human file is different, she said slowly. It is locked at the highest security level, accessible only to the Sithar High Council and a few senior analysts. The display showed a warning label that Lyra translated for him. Category 1 Apex Civilization Potential. She read aloud while meeting his eyes. Humanity is flagged as one of only 4 species in galactic history to receive this designation. Daniel stared at the classification and tried to understand what it meant. What is a Category 1 Apex Civilization? He asked carefully. Lyra pulled up historical records showing 3 other species that bore the same designation, all of them extinct or transformed beyond recognition. These are civilizations that fundamentally reshaped galactic order through their actions, she explained while showing how each had changed the balance of power. They possess combinations of traits that make them either great protectors or terrible conquerors. She focused the display on the human file specifically. Humanity has several traits that our models identify as markers for apex potential, Lyra said while highlighting different sections of data. Extreme adaptability that allows humans to survive in environments that would kill most species. The display showed humans living in deserts, Arctic regions, underwater habitats, and space stations. Persistence that borders on obsession when humans decide something is important to them, she continued. Most species give up when faced with repeated failure, but humans seem to view obstacles as challenges rather than barriers. Daniel thought about human history and had to admit she was right about that particular trait. Emotional depth that creates strong bonds between individuals and drives humans to sacrifice for others. Lyra added while glancing at him meaningfully. This is rare among species that also possess high aggression and territorial instincts. She pulled up the final trait that made humans unusual. Pattern recognition and creative problem solving that exceeds even advanced artificial intelligence in certain contexts. She explained, humans can make intuitive leaps that pure logic cannot achieve. Daniel absorbed this information slowly while trying to reconcile the image of humanity as special with his own experience as just another cargo pilot. But lots of species must have some of these traits, he protested weakly. Lyra shook her head and brought up comparative data. Individual traits are common throughout the galaxy, she agreed. But the specific combination that humans possess has only appeared 3 other times in 100,000 years of observation. She let that sink in before continuing with the harder part. I accessed this file illegally after you saved me because I needed to understand, she admitted. What kind of being sacrifices freedom for a stranger's child? Especially when that stranger belongs to a species you barely know? Daniel felt uncomfortable with the weight she was placing on his decision. I just did what felt right, he said quietly. That is exactly what makes humans so important, Lyra responded firmly. You possess the capability for extreme violence and conquest, but also the capacity for selfless compassion. The display shifted to show a new section of the file, and Lyra's expression became more serious. This is the part that has caused division in the Sithar High Council, she said, while pulling up predictive models. The warning about humanity's future. Daniel leaned forward to read the data that Lyra translated. Our models predict that humanity will face a critical decision point within the next 50 years, she explained. As Earth expands into the galaxy and encounters the broader community, humans will experience significant conflict. The display showed probability branches splitting in 2 distinct directions. The warning states that humanity's response to this conflict will determine which path they follow. Lyra continued. Path 1 shows humans becoming protectors who use their unique traits to defend weaker species and establish a more just galactic order. She highlighted the second branch with clear reluctance. Path 2 shows humans becoming conquerors whose persistence and adaptability make them unstoppable, she said quietly. This path leads to widespread suffering and eventually to humanity's destruction through galactic coalition. Daniel felt the weight of this prediction pressing down on him. And the Sithar Council is divided about what to do? He asked. Lyra nodded slowly. Some council members believe we should contain humanity now before you become too powerful, she admitted. Others believe that individuals like you prove humanity will choose Path 1 if given proper guidance. She met his eyes with absolute sincerity. I testified before the High Council about what you did for me, Lyra said. I told them that a human chose my life over his freedom when he had every logical reason to save himself. Daniel started to speak, but she continued. The Council has agreed to limited contact with humanity, based partly on my testimony, she revealed. But they need more evidence that humans will choose protection over conquest. She took a deep breath before asking the question that clearly terrified her. They want to meet you and ask directly, Lyra said. They want to know if humanity will choose to be protectors or rulers when given the power to reshape the galaxy. Daniel looked out at the stars and felt the impossible weight of speaking for his entire species. 6 months passed in a blur of activity that changed Daniel's life completely. From the prisoner who had given up hope to an ambassador, representing humanity's future relationship with the Sithar civilization DR. Lisa Morgan worked tirelessly to coordinate between Earth's government and the Sithar High Council, establishing protocols for information sharing that would give humanity access to 100,000 years of recorded history without overwhelming their systems. Daniel spent his time learning about galactic politics and cultural practices under Lyra's patient guidance, studying species profiles and historical conflicts that shaped the current balance of power. The partnership began yielding results faster than anyone expected when intelligence gathered from Sithar databases revealed the locations of 17 Rin prison facilities scattered across multiple systems. Elder Nera proposed a joint operation to liberate these facilities as a demonstration of human Sithar cooperation and a test of humanity's commitment to protecting weaker species. Captain Ryan Mitchell commanded the combined fleet that assembled for the mission. 3 Sithar diplomatic vessels, supported by 2 human frigates that Earth had sent with Dr. Morgan's strong recommendation. Daniel stood on the bridge of the Radiant Dawn alongside Lyra, who had been promoted to mission coordinator based on her experience and her personal connection to the cause. Approaching the first target facility, Mitchell reported while tactical displays showed the prison structure orbiting a barren moon. Scanning for life signs now, the readings showed over 200 prisoners from at least 15 different species trapped in conditions similar to what Daniel had endured. The Vrin garrison is minimal, Lyra noted while analyzing the defensive capabilities. They rely on isolation and fear rather than military strength. Mitchell gave the order, and the fleet moved into position with practiced precision that demonstrated how well the human and Sithar crews had learned to work together. The operation proceeded smoothly, with Sithar ships jamming communications while human marines breached the facility and secured the guards without any prisoner casualties. Daniel accompanied Lyra into the prison itself and felt memories flooding back as they walked through corridors that smelled exactly like Kethra Prime. They found prisoners in various states of despair and hope, some too broken by their experiences to believe rescue was real. A small alien child from a species Daniel did not recognize huddled in the corner of one cell. crying softly while other prisoners tried to comfort her. Lyra knelt beside the child and spoke gently in a language that Daniel's translator could not process, her voice carrying the same compassion that she had shown despite her own fear when Daniel had saved her. The child looked up at Lyra with enormous eyes and asked something that made Lyra smile sadly. She wants to know if we are here too. Take her to worst place. Lyra translated while helping the child stand. She does not believe that rescue exists. Daniel felt something shift inside him as he watched Lyra guide the child toward freedom. This was what the Scyther had meant about humanity's choice. The decision between using power to protect or to dominate over the following weeks. The Joint Fleet liberated all 17 facilities and freed over 3,000 prisoners representing dozens of species from across the ice. Galaxy news of the operation spread rapidly through diplomatic channels and independent media networks, creating a narrative that surprised many observers. Humans and Scyther working together to end slavery, using their combined capabilities to protect those who could not protect themselves. Daniel received messages from freed prisoners thanking him personally, even though he had only been one small part of a much larger effort. One message came from a Vrin prisoner who had been imprisoned for speaking out against his own government's criminal activities. Your species is learning what true strength means, the Vrin wrote. Not the power to conquer, but the courage to stand for justice, even when it costs you everything. Dr. Morgan showed Daniel the updated probability models that the Scyther had shared with her confidentially. The predictions are changing, she explained, while highlighting the shifts in humanity's projected path. The likelihood of Path 1 has increased by 17% since the liberation operations began. Daniel studied the numbers and tried to understand their significance. Is that enough to convince the Scyther Council? He asked. Dr. Morgan smiled and shook her head. Elder Nira told me that predictions are not certainties, she said. But the trend suggests that human actions can influence the larger pattern. 3 months after the first liberation, Daniel stood in the observation deck of the Radiant Dawn with Lyra beside him. They watched Earth hanging in space below them, blue and green and beautiful, despite all the problems humanity had yet to solve. I need to tell you something, Lyra said quietly while her reflection in the window showed nervousness. The Scyther models are updating in real time based on human behavior. She pulled up a display that showed probability curves shifting gradually toward Path 1. Your individual choice to save me has influenced thousands of other choices, she explained. The freed prisoners who tell their stories, the human Marines who showed restraint during the operations, the Scyther Council members who voted for cooperation. Daniel felt humbled by the suggestion that his actions mattered on such a large scale. I just did what felt right, he protested gently. That is the point, Lyra responded with intensity. You did not calculate the galactic implications or think about humanity's future reputation. She turned to face him directly. You saw a child who needed help, and you chose to help her despite the cost to yourself, she continued. That is the essence of Path 1 behavior. Daniel looked back at Earth and thought about the billions of humans living their lives without knowing about Scyther predictions or apex civilizations. Most people will never know about these choices on a galactic scale, he said thoughtfully. They will just make decisions based on what seems right in the moment. Lyra nodded slowly. And that is why the Scyther believe humanity has a chance, she replied. Because your moral choices happen at the individual level before they scale up to governments and civilizations. She pulled up one final piece of data that made Daniel's breath catch. This is a Scyther historical record entry that was created yesterday, she said while the text appeared in English translation. It marks the official beginning of human-Scyther cooperation. Daniel read the entry carefully, noting how it described his sacrifice and Lyra's return as the defining moment that establish trust between their species. I returned your sacrifice, not just by rescuing you from prison, Lyra said softly, but by giving humanity a chance to prove that you can choose protection over conquest. She gestured toward Earth with clear hope in her expression. You gave me my life back when you saved me, she continued. Now my people are giving humanity the information and support you need to become the protectors that the galaxy needs. Daniel felt tears forming as he understood the full circle of what had happened. One choice to save a child had created ripples that changed the trajectory of human galactic integration. What happens now? He asked while wiping his eyes. Lyra smiled and pulled out mission briefings for future cooperation efforts. Now we continue proving that the choice was right, she said firmly. We rescue more prisoners. We share more knowledge. We build more trust between species. She met his eyes with absolute certainty. And someday, when historians look back at this moment, they will mark it as the point where humanity began its journey as protectors rather than conquerors. Daniel looked at the mission briefings and saw references to exploration initiatives, medical assistance programs, and diplomatic outreach to species facing threats from more aggressive civilizations. The Sithar are giving us a roadmap, he realized, showing us how to use our strengths for protection instead of domination. Lyra nodded in agreement. We have 100,000 years of examples showing what works and what fails, she said. And we are sharing all of it with humanity because one human showed us that your species can choose wisely when given the chance. Captain Mitchell's voice came over the intercom announcing their departure from Earth orbit. The radiant dawn began moving away from him. The planet and Daniel watched his homeworld shrink in the window. Do you think we will succeed? He asked Lyra quietly. She was silent for a moment before responding. The models show increasing probability but not certainty, she admitted. Humanity still has the capacity to choose either path. She placed her hand on the window beside his. But I believe you will choose correctly, because I have seen what humans can be when they decide to care more about others than about themselves. Lyra said with conviction. Daniel thought about the child in the prison who had not believed rescue was possible, about the freed prisoners sending messages of gratitude, about the human Marines who had shown restraint despite facing enemies who deserved their anger. One person's choice can matter, he said slowly. Even on a galactic scale. Lyra smiled and nodded. That is what I told the High Council when they questioned whether saving you was worth the risk, she replied. One person's choice to do the right thing can inspire thousands of other right choices. She pulled up the final image, a timeline showing humanity's projected future with the probability of Path 1 now exceeding 50% for the first time since the predictions began.